My stepsister and stepmother are completely jealous that I'm about to get married before her daughters do. So now they're trying to absolutely ruin my best day, but I'm not going to go down without a fight. So I tricked them. A little bit of old-fashioned revenge. I let them think that they were in the high-up position and could call all the shots for the wedding, and then I pulled the rug right out from underneath their feet. I don't know if I was just unlucky, but I was thinking I'd find someone who would replace my mother after she died of cancer. But I was wrong. My mom passed away when I was a teenager, and after she died, my dad and I never remained the same. Every morning I would wake up hoping my deceased mom would just open the door to my room, tell me that her death was all a prank. So everything would return to normal, but that never happened. After some years, Dad remarried Melissa. At first I thought Melissa and her daughters, my stepsisters, were a blessing from God because she was my father's friend and was always around to cheer him up. Before she got married to Dad, she looked after me like I was her own. At least that's what I thought until I convinced my father to marry Melissa because I liked her. My biggest mistake ever. Well, Melissa was a divorcee with 2 daughters, Celine and Maria. They were both older than me, and I looked up to them as older sisters. When Dad finally agreed to marry Melissa, I was happy for us, though I was already grown up and I still needed that mother figure in my life. And Melissa seemed to be the perfect candidate. Her daughters were not really my friends, but they made me feel like I was a part of them, and this helped me a lot during my grieving period. Melissa was the kind of woman whom I'd say made some good business decisions, and things turned out well for her. Her former husband was equally rich, but after they divorced, she left with part of his money, and this really contributed to her success. Dad, on the other hand, was just middle class. We paid our bills on time and had just enough to sustain us until the next salary was being paid. So, I was quite sure Melissa was not hanging around because of my father's money. She did love him, and it was really foolish of me to think that she would extend that love to me. Well, after Dad and Melissa got married, she suggested that we moved into her house since it was bigger and fancier, and I thought this was a great idea. My father did not see it as a big deal, and besides, it would be very, hard for her and her 2 daughters to move into our house. So we moved to theirs. Her house was a way bigger one, and she lived in a better neighborhood, so this was a good plan. Some days after we moved, I noticed the way Melissa treated me to begin with. It was changing. It started with her daughters leaving leftover food for me in the kitchen, and wanting me to do their dishes because I was the youngest in the house. As of this time, I was only 15 years old, and both of them were at least 3 years older than me. I complained to Melissa and my father about it, and she would call her daughters and yell at them in my father's presence, but each time this happened, things got worse. Let me really explain who Celine and Maria were. They were really dirty pigs. Who only looked good, blinky, and nice outside, but inside they were terrible baby pigs. Oh, I think in the space of 4 months, we had to call cleaners twice to come clean their rooms, because of the horrendous smell that came out of there whenever they opened the doors. It literally looked like a nest. They didn't do anything to help around the home anymore, not even the least as washing their own dishes. Everything just became my responsibility from the day we moved in. I didn't even want to remember when the laundry machine wasn't working. My stepmom made sure I did the laundry by hand, including her clothes and her daughter's clothes too. I was in charge of grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning the house, and any possible chore you can think of. The most emotional part was this. Every time I complained to my father about how I was being maltreated, Melissa would pull the emotional blackmail card and tell my father I was just being too lazy and he was simply spoiling me. She'd even go as far as quoting her usual lines. Well, God knows I'm trying to be a good mother, James, but she thinks I'm punishing her. Meanwhile, I'm training her to become a good woman." Well, with these words and fake tears in her eyes, my father would support her and not me. So with this, I grew up to be the black sheep of the family while my stepmother's hate grew for me. She always wanted everyone in the house to be happy, except me. She would even go shopping for my dad and her daughters, but would not get anything for me ever. And my dad barely noticed because I was forced to wear hand-me-down clothing. Clothes Celine and Maria had already worn. Speaking of birthdays, I never really got to celebrate mine. She'd always promised to get me a cake whenever my dad was around, and would deliberately always end up forgetting. Years passed by, and I began to accept my reality. It was a good thing that I made friends with other teenagers in the neighborhood, and whenever I wasn't at home being their maid, I was always spending time at a friend's house. One time, my dad had traveled for work conference in another state, leaving me home alone with Melissa and my stepsisters. From the minute my dad moved, Melissa asked me to clean the whole house, make sure it was spotless, mow the lawn, and even do the laundry. And because I didn't want any trouble, I had to do all she asked me to do. But I lost my cool after. I returned to see the kitchen I had already cleaned in a very terrible shape. Celine and Maria decided they wanted to bake a cake and some pastries. I literally knocked down the water, milk, and flour, spilled butter on the counter, and made a mess everywhere. When the baking process did turn out the way they wanted it, they abandoned it and asked me to clean it up, and of course, Melissa supported them. At this point, I've had enough of them, and I was so exhausted. I told Melissa I wasn't going to clean the kitchen twice, and she slapped me for talking back to her. And then she said I would not live under her roof and disobey her, so she kicked me out that evening. I ended up crashing at a friend's place, and as I expected, she told my father lies, and he would not let my phone rest. Down the line, college came, and I was grateful to God for finally leaving Melissa's hellhole. College was in a different city, so I moved away. I knew my dad was going to miss me, but he had Melissa and their girls. And from the look of things, they obviously preferred him, not me. I was in college, and then I met Hendrik. He was in business, and I was in human psychology. Hendrik was almost rounding up when we met, but we didn't allow that to come between us. We connected so well, and he gave me the love I've always yearned for. Hendrik and I dated for 2 years. He was lucky to get a job right after he left the college, so hey, I moved in with him. I was also working part-time to support myself, since I did not want anything to do with my stepmother's money. Also, in all the years I've been away at college, I only visited home on Christmas Eve and returned the same week. I did not want to spend a week under my toxic stepmother's roof. Every time I returned home, they'd complain I had changed, but they only said this because I was no longer the emotional weak girl that they could manipulate and treat as they liked. Whenever they said this, I'd just smile and say, "Things change, people grow." And somehow this sentence would really infuriate Celine and Maria. They were now so grown and complete disaster of a mess. They blamed each other for their clumsiness and mistakes, and Melissa certainly did not have a problem with the 2 grown women who has no jobs, no relationships, and are completely ambitionless. I'd say life for Celine and Maria was a Barbie concert. They never lived in real reality. They've always just acted like they were in the spotlight, and the world was just watching them. But in reality, they had no one in their lives except Melissa and my father. They sucked at making friends and could not even have boyfriends because they believed their Prince and Charming would just come and sweep them off their feet someday. Celine and Maria depend on Melissa to hook them up with sons of her rich business associates. And after one terrible fight over a man between the both of them, Melissa stopped. At least she was sensible enough to save her career. On the brighter side, things got more intense between Hendrik and me. And he even asked me to marry him. It wasn't the ideal night proposal close to the Eiffel Tower type thing that I always imagined as a teenage girl, but it was the most beautiful moment of my life. I said yes, and since he was already making plans for the wedding behind my back, I figured it was time for him to meet my family. He always wanted to meet them, but having a stepmother like Melissa and stepsisters like Celine and Maria who did not like me, I've always postponed our visits until he asked me to marry him. I called home that I was coming in with someone during the weekend so everybody could be home. I'm happy. I told Hendrik about my stepmother and stepsisters, so he could see through their pretense and not fall for their drama. When I got home, I introduced Hendrik to everyone and they all acted nice, most especially Celine and Maria. They wore tops that exposed their cleavages, and they even had makeup on. I knew what they were trying to do, but I had to play along. Melissa looked very glad to see Hendrik. She even asked if he wanted anything. So she could go into the kitchen, but Hendrik denied. Deep down, I knew Melissa wasn't happy for me. Her daughters were due for marriage, but nobody wanted them. Even though the daughters of Melissa's younger sister were married, but her daughters continued to live in her home. As a tradition in our family, I was not allowed to plan my wedding without my family, and this meant I had to plan with my dad, Melissa, and her daughters. In a nutshell, they made the planning absolute hell, and I almost called off the entire thing. They disagreed with almost everything I wanted. They disagreed with my wedding gown, shoes, jewelry, food, event planner, and almost everything. It wasn't like she was paying for the wedding. Hendrik, me, and his family were taking care of all the bills, and not even $1 contribution was coming from Melissa. I made that clear from the first day. Finally, after weeks of going back and forth, we all agreed on a couple of things. Melissa asked me to make one of her daughters my maid of honor. She literally wanted to force that down my throat. I knew she was trying to manipulate me again, and there was no way I'd make either Celine or Maria my maid of honor. They were neither my friends nor sisters, but because my dad was on the table, I agreed to it. This was only to make them happy and feel like they had control over me, but deep down, I knew who my maid of honor was, and I wasn't going to let any of my stepsisters take that position. Another thing we disagreed on was the venue of the wedding. I always had this ideal hall for my wedding dream. It wasn't too big and it wasn't too small. I just wanted it to be a long walk down the aisle, and Hendrik thought it was perfect, but not Melissa and my stepsisters. They said it's just too fancy, and since Hendrik and I were not so rich, we could either do a beach wedding or a field wedding. I didn't want to do any of that. Right from when Hendrik proposed, I started to save money for the wedding hall. It was what I really wanted, and Hendrik respected that. For me, it wasn't really the wedding dress, the makeup, or the jewelry. It was about the venue. Melissa was right, though. The hall was quite expensive, and she didn't think that we could afford it because she didn't want us in such a beautiful place. By the way, everything she and her daughters picked out was trash. The wedding dress they loved was an eyesore. Their cake of choice made me disgusted. They obviously just picked what they loved. And their choice of jewelry looked like some Barbie costume, including the dress for the bridal train. The only pretty dress, which was by far prettier than my wedding dress, was guess who? The maid of honors. Hendrik and I understood what was going on, so we just played along. Aside from not making any of her daughters my maid of honor, we weren't going with any of their plans. Hendrik and I already hired a trusted wedding planner, and she took care of everything for us. I knew the wedding dress I was going to wear, I knew my jewelry, even the makeup artist, everything. Would you even believe Celine and Maria said I didn't need makeup because I was naturally beautiful? I laughed. Whenever I remember this, it's just, my fiancé and I knew what we were going into, and we were so prepared. We knew the whole drama of concern from Melissa and her daughters was just to ruin my big day. They acted like they really cared and spent time with us just to make sure my wedding was a disaster. But I wasn't going to let that happen. It was a great thing they were too lazy to shop with me. So whenever they asked if I've gotten the things I needed, I'd said yes, and they would fake a smile. We took about a month to get the money for the wedding venue since it was a bit expensive. Before this, we made the necessary calls to the venue, and they only agreed to get part of the payment and the remaining payment before the wedding day. Hendrik and I put down 20% since we had a lot to take care of. But when it was time to complete the payment, we were told the venue had been booked for the same day, and they even refunded our money. This was a big disappointment on my end. I knew how much I wanted that venue, but since we were running out of time, I had to search for a new place, or I'd end up doing the field wedding like Melissa and my stepsister suggested. What is up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. I hope you're enjoying your day so far. Update number 1, it came out just some weeks later. If you guys aren't subscribed to the channel yet, go ahead and do that. It does support me a lot, and I really appreciate all the support from you guys. Here is update number 1. A few weeks later, lucky for Hendrik and me, we found a nice venue, and it was not even expensive as the first. On the good side, this helped us in channeling the money that was meant for the first hall in different things. I wasn't mad at the venue owners per se. They were not going to tie down their venue for someone who'd paid 20%, while they literally had somebody ready to pay in full. Though yeah, it was very disappointing. I moved past it. When I told Melissa and my stepsisters that someone else had booked the venue, they pretended to be sad for me and encouraged me to go with the field wedding, which was almost no cost. Right there, my gut told me they had something to do with it since they did not look surprised. I lived with them for years, so I could tell if something took them by surprise or if they were just obviously pretending. The preparations for our wedding continued, and I made my payback plans too. I bought the exact fabric Melissa and her daughters had chosen for the maid of honor dress, and I invited a fashion designer to take their measurements and make their dresses. I told them it'd be unfair of me to pick one sister since both of them were my favorite, so I asked them both to be my maids of honor. It was a very unusual thing to see, but I wanted them to have a taste of their own medicine. They were both excited, and they thought it was the sweetest thing ever. My dad and Melissa were impressed with what I have done, but that wasn't all. I fixed my bridal shower and invited my 2 stepsisters too. Normally, I would not make such a mistake. The bridal shower was to hold 2 weeks after the fixed date, so this gave me time to get to know them very well. I told them I wanted them to be a part of the bridal shower, so I needed to know the kind of drinks they loved and the ones they did not love. From the looks on their faces, it was obvious they fell for everything, and this pleased me. I dreamed so much of humiliating them that I could not think of anything else. You can call me petty if you want, but these women made life miserable for me. I was their live-in maid for years. One time, Melissa even convinced my father to move my room to her basement, because the luxury of my room was making me lazy and disrespectful. It still baffles me what luxury she was talking about. The only thing I had was a wardrobe, a bed, a chair, and a table. I was able to buy a mirror and a coat hanger from a thrift store with the money I saved for weeks. My room was nothing compared to her daughter's rooms, which looked like a mini mall, and she dared call that luxury? Update number 2. As believable as this sounds, it breaks my heart so much. I know Melissa hated me, but I didn't think she would go as far as to do what she did. A week before the wedding, I was home alone. Melissa and her daughters had gone shopping as usual, and my father had gone off to work, and I was trying to rest my head. I was still asleep when I heard Celine on the phone. She was obviously talking to Maria, and my guess is she was not expecting me to be there. Before they left, I told them I was going out to shop for a few things, and I wouldn't be back until the evening. But I changed my mind because of the one-sided headache that would not go away, and I took that as my cue to come home and stay and just rest. While she was on the phone, she said, and I quote, "Oh, poor thing. How do you think she's going to react if she finds out Mother booked her wedding venue for nothing, just so she could teach her a lesson?" And then she laughed. The house was so quiet, so I know what I heard word for word. The next thing, I tiptoed to the door, which was not fully shut, and recorded her on the call. The remaining part of her conversation, I sent it to Hendrik, and he was so mad Melissa could not even think to do something like that to us, could she? He wanted to come over and confront her, but I knew that would ruin the plans I had for my stepsisters, so I asked him to play it cool. I wanted everything to be done and over with. I knew Melissa did not like me, and she wanted to ruin my wedding plans because I got married before her daughters. Though I don't really believe that's the whole reason. Even if her daughters were married before me, she would still try to ruin my plans. When Melissa returned home, I asked her if she would love to do the mother and daughter dance with me, but she declined. She blatantly said that she would love to do her first mother-daughter dance with any of her biological daughters. And well, yeah, I understood that. I looked at my father, who was sitting there with us, and I gave him a "I told you so" look. I thought he would try and convince Melissa to dance, but he just remained quiet. He was definitely tired of her attitude towards me, and if he insisted, Melissa would remind him of how she had been such a fantastic mother to me, and that she doesn't deserve to be talked to in that manner. That night, while we had dinner, I was so mad at everyone, including my father. I was mad that he allowed me to go through all the terrible, inhumane things in hands of Melissa and her daughters, and he did nothing about it. My dad was the typical meek, soft man who did not love any form of trouble or fighting, and that's why he avoided having arguments or ever fighting with Melissa. Update number 3. I know I told Hendrik to keep his cool and not tell my father about Melissa booking my wedding venue, but he broke his side of the promise. At first, I regretted the actions that followed, but if he did not react that way, maybe things would not have turned out the way they did. Remember, I said Melissa was used to my dad being all meek and gentle. He had never raised his voice at her or showed anger. When my dad found out what Melissa had done, he confronted her. The craziest part was that it was on the day we had a couple of visitors at home. It was 3 days to my wedding. And Hendrik tried to keep it in, but the more he spoke and saw Melissa pretending to care, the more infuriating he was. As I said, my dad confronted Melissa about it. She denied booking the hall, and she pulled the emotional blackmail card, and told me, well, Dad, that she knew how much I loved and wanted the venue, and she would never do such a terrible thing to me. She was so good at pretending that it was almost believable. My father, who had already listened to the recording I sent to Hendrik, was not buying her crap. So he asked Hendrik to play the recording, and when she recognized her daughter's voice, it seemed like she forgot how to speak. To be honest, it was my first time and their first time seeing my dad so angry. He turned the color of a beet, and he had veins popping out of his neck. She was so afraid of what my dad would do next, so she lied. The stare that she gave to Celine showed how furious she was at her for exposing their secret. Even Celine could not deny receiving that call too. Everyone who came to visit was a surprise too, including people from her office. She carried herself like a sweet butterfly who would never hurt anyone, and no one believed that she could do it. When she had seen the disappointment and shock on their faces, she began to laugh so hard and then stopped. Melissa said she booked the venue as a surprise for me, because she knew how much I wanted it, and since I did not let her contribute to the wedding, this was her own wedding gift to me. Oh boy, this woman was such a good liar. Hendrik and I knew she was lying, as she was so good at it that everyone believed her. With these words, she succeeded in pacifying my father. He always fell for her lies, but not me. Then she pretended to be mad and said Celine and my father had ruined her surprise. My dad apologized for his actions and thanked her for being such a great mom to me. Ugh, roll my eyes. Yeah, great mom indeed. The only good thing was, Hendrik and I ended up using my dream wedding venue, and we didn't even have to pay a penny for it. Got her. Update number 4. Final update posted by OP. On the night of the bridal shower, I made sure that Celine and Maria drank in a stupor. Yes, this was my plan. I wanted them to get so drunk that they got a hangover the next day, and that's why I made sure that there were enough of their favorite alcohol to go around. And like I expected, they got wasted. The next day was my wedding day, and things went as planned for Hendrik and me. My maid of honor was my closest friend from college. She traveled into town the day before our wedding, and she was all part of the plan. Celine and Maria did not go back home that night, so they slept in the hotel room, leaving just Melissa and my father to go to our wedding from home. Before I left the hotel room, I switched off their mobile phones and left them in the bathroom, so it'd take them minutes to find them. I can swear I'd seen Melissa's mouth fall off when she saw me walking down the aisle in a very beautiful wedding dress and not the ugly gown that she picked out. What surprised her the most was not seeing her daughters as my maid of honor as we had planned. She kept looking out for them, but she couldn't find them. From the front of the hall where I stood, I saw her with the phone, and I knew she was trying to call her daughters. The expression on her face was everything to die for. She sat next to my father, and it was really obvious that she was worried, but my dad didn't even pay much attention to her. Once I said my vows and it was time for the wedding reception, she found her way to me and asked if I've seen my sisters. I told her the last time I saw them was during the bridal shower, and they had so much to drink, which meant they were either still sleeping or at home. Like the smart lady, well, she asked me how I was able to find a maid of honor to replace my sister so quickly. And that's when I told her I never intended for any of her daughters to be my maid of honor. It was me playing along all the time. I'm sure at that point she realized everything when she saw my wedding cake. It was the exact color, size, and shape. Everything I wanted it to be. By this time, it was noon, and she could not just get mad and leave the wedding. So she stayed because she respected my father. Not long after Melissa and I spoke, Celine and Maria showed up in their maid of honor dresses. They looked like a total mess, and the smell of alcohol was still strong on their breath. I wasn't expecting them to show up at all, but they did, and everything turned out just as I wanted. Melissa, Celine, and Maria were so angry when they realized they were the same fabric design as the people who were hired to serve. Yeah, you like that touch, didn't you? I specifically got the same fabric for all 4 girls, and I asked my designer to make their clothes. When they could not bear the shame, especially after inviting their friends, they went home with Melissa. My dad didn't stay mad for long, and even if he did, I had paid them back with the same coin. After the wedding, Hendrik and I went on a luxury honeymoon, with the money that we had saved up by not renting the expensive hall, since Melissa had graciously taken care of the bill. This was the sweetest part of our wedding. As a grand part of our honeymoon, we took a couple of cute pictures, made a post on Facebook, and tagged Melissa to it. I can't say she didn't see them, I'm sure she did, even if she didn't. Celine or Maria must have showed them to her. And I know she's not going to forgive herself for being so stupid in a very long time. When the wedding pictures were out, we noticed the photographer took cool shots of my stepsisters with the other girls in the same uniform. She must have thought they all worked together. So I uploaded them on Facebook, and I tagged Celine and Maria and thanked them especially for being my maids of honor. Then I blocked them swiftly afterwards. Yeah, I know it was petty, but it made me feel great. Hendrik and I returned to the state we lived in before we hadn't heard from them till now. Though my dad visits once in a while, but Melissa and her daughters, they're simply just not part of my life anymore. Thank you guys so much for the support in the comment section. There's a lot of stories that I've read on this channel and a lot of stories that we've gone through. I don't know if I've seen a diabolical plan / revenge / pettiness work out so well in OP's favor. I mean, she even planned it down to have other bridesmaids there. She knew that those two sisters were not going to show up. I would like to know what you guys thought about this story. Make sure you drop it down in the comment section down below and let me know how bad that this stepmother actually was. But to me, I think the ultimate enemy of this story is OP's father. He just didn't seem to care about his daughter. He let his new wife, run all over his biological daughter and didn't really care to intervene and just always believed her lies. So let me know. If you had a say and you were OP and you were in their position, what would you do to this wicked stepmother? Drop your thoughts down below, guys. Thank you for joining me on today's video. I hope you enjoyed. Have a fantastic day, and I will see you tomorrow.